Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 4 of LK Launch 19. Today, it's about supporting English English language learners in the classroom. And our host today is Steph Wood. Steph's been supporting English language learners since 2013. As a lover of languages, she loves learning with how language works and working with her students to grow their proficiency in English. She herself is an English language learner, grew up speaking Italian, and the last couple of years she's been working in the Lambton Kent District School Board to bring her personal experience to connect. So that's really relevant, eh? If you've got a common experience to what your other students do. Along with her, we've got Teresa Lopatron, fresh from Italy and France this summer. And she's getting ready to head to the cottage in Halliburton, but we're glad to have her with us this morning. And they are supported by Tawny McCormick, who is going to help keep an eye on the chat. And she's a secondary ELL person in the Lambton Kent Board. So we're really glad to have all of you here. We also are very happy to have some learners with us in the meeting. And some other people later on will be able to learn from this. So we're going to record this and save it forward. Again, if you'd like to participate in the discussion, you're welcome to let us know you want to turn your microphone on and we can have you share your voice. But for the most part, we want you to share any input you have in the chat box. So open chat and you can keep an eye on what's going on in the background. I'm going to be here the whole time, but it's time for me to turn off my microphone and my camera so we can let our presenters take over. So I'm going to leave it to you guys. You can take it away.
Thanks so much, Rod. Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Hello.
So we're here today to talk about supporting English language learners in the classroom. We're going to answer a lot of frequently asked questions that we get asked a lot, and we're just going to chat about some of the things that we do and some of the ideas that we have for you to help you get started with your English language learners. Our contact information is here, and as he mentioned, we're the elementary, and then we also have one of our secondary partners here. So if there are specific questions, you are able to reach out to us to ask about specific cases for your particular English language learners. So I thought it would be fun to get started with what was the most surprising thing that you learned when we started this? Because this is a relatively new role for both Teresa and I. I've been doing it 6 years, Teresa's been doing it 2. But I always find it's interesting to talk about, like, what surprised you?
I guess what surprised me the most is how some can speak, sorry, I'm going to take these headphones off, how some could speak so well in English at first, but then when you get deep, you dig deep, to read is where they're struggling. And so to get in there and understand, to meet them where they're at and start there. And also how fast they learn. Once you give them the tools, how quickly they come.
It is, it's amazing. But it's true, the depth of language we don't see, right? Because we talk to them and we can have conversations and we can talk about their home and their daily lives and what they did today, but then we start talking with that deeper academic language and things get lost.
Right, and so the teachers, assuming they're higher up where they
should totally trick us.
Yeah, so they trick us all the time. So I can get why it's confusing and complicated.
Yeah. I was really surprised at how many languages and countries we have. So we have kids from over 50 countries and over 50 languages in our board. And so most of my experience was at one school when I started. So I didn't realize how incredibly diverse our board actually is.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And how really happy neat. They are to be here.
They are happy to be here. So we get this one a lot. Teachers are like, oh my goodness, I have a new English language learner. They maybe have a few words, hello, thank you. What's the best way that we can get them started?
Just get to know them. Mm-hmm. Really give them opportunity to just get to know them. It takes a while. There is a silent period for some where they're quiet, but when you one-on-one, they seem to open up a little bit more. Google Translate is where I would start. There's other apps that are better.
Any comment about the Google Translate?
Oh yeah, it doesn't translate verbatim. And sometimes the words that they're using, they look at me like, what's this even saying? And so that you can tell by their faces that we're not on the right track.
Yeah, often single word is the best way to go with the Google Translate. Putting in big, huge, long sentences or paragraphs can go sideways sometimes.
Yeah.
Also, it's like, really easy things. If your child is coming from a language that doesn't use the same alphabet as English, having a model for the alphabet is really helpful for them so that they can look at it. Saying their name
Right.
is really important. And it's really like a lot of the names are challenging for us because we don't have those sounds, or we don't have, right? But learning to say their name and practicing saying their name and making sure that you are saying their name correctly can make them feel so much better. I've seen a lot of talk on Twitter about that, about adults talking about how that really bothered them when they were students.
Let them teach you how to write your name like in Arabic.
Yes.
They taught me how to write mine, which is super cool.
Some of them love to teach you parts of their language. Some of them will love to reach out to the rest of the class and teach them words or phrases that we use often. Can I get a drink? Can I go to the bathroom? All of those things are super fun for them to teach. And then everybody can use the language, right?
They can be on sentence starters, like around the room. And the value of games, board games.
Yes, games are huge. And just the oral language that happens through games, right? And then pictures and gestures to help them figure out what it is that they need to communicate to you.
Working with their peers.
And working with their peers.
Very important.
Kids are wonderful helpers. Absolutely. So another question that we get at the very beginning is, how do I communicate with the parents?
Sometimes the community, the host families they'll come in, or they have family members that come in, or members of the church that would come in and help translate with them. That's how I've experienced it before. Sometimes trying to get a translator to write a letter. We're working on that as well, and just getting the key information to them, just keeping it simple. Some of the parents don't have the academics as well, so some of them can't read and write, so that's when we run into a couple of challenges.
And especially if the families are new and they don't have any experience with English, any of them, right? Keeping it just making sure they know the date, the time, and then highlight where they sign for the signature. We are fortunate that we do have a lot of families that have sponsors, or have families that are already here that have been able to help them with some of those transitions. But sending the big, huge, long form with all of the paragraphs on it can be overwhelming for the parents as well.
And especially if you're relying on Google Translate for that.
Yeah.
And reaching out to community partners, if it's more about like a field trip and it's going to affect 3 or 4 families, the community partners can do that.
We are very lucky in our board that we do have community partners in both Sarnia and Chatham that are able to help us with a lot of the reaching out to families and communicating to families. So if you do run into that, you are able to contact us and we can help put you in touch with one of those people that could help you. We get this one a lot. Because they are using the first language, then teachers aren't sure, because often they're like, well, I'm not sure what they're saying, or I don't know if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, or if they're on task. So what do you think about that?
I just think when the students are proficient in their first language, it translates so much better into their second. So don't stop them from speaking their first language. It gives you a lot of clues as well, and we'll get into that later. It helps you understand if they're fluent in that language, especially reading a paragraph for you. You understand, it helps translate for them.
There is a lot you can learn from the first language. We will talk about that a little bit. But there's research that that shows that, sorry, I was reading the chat box. There is research that shows that the stronger the first language is, the easier it is to acquire additional languages. And so when our students are coming here, they're coming with the first language, but then they're also learning English. And then also in our board, they start French right in grade 1. So they're adding those extra languages on top. So the more we can encourage them to develop their first language, the more anchor there is for the additional languages that they add on after the fact. So yes, absolutely encourage them to use their first language. But again, there's time and place too.
I just add,
yes.
Engagement.
So Tawny's talking about engagement and it helping them.
Whoops. I don't know how to talk about, but just reinforce that if they're doing something, they don't have the words in English. They don't want to just sit there all day. At least they're writing in the first language and they're thinking, and making that connection is huge.
We're going to talk specifically about using first language. So we also get this sometimes, what can we learn from their first language skills? Although we will often be the ones that will be like, have you asked them? Because you can learn a lot from what they can do in their first language.
Yeah, you'll be able to tell if they are reading, at least.
Yes.
Knowing if they have the skill to write out sentences, paragraphs. You can learn a lot from what they know by just what they demonstrate. We won't know what they're writing. It's not as important.
And that's often what teachers say, right? But I won't know what it says. Yeah. But as teachers, we know a lot about the age of our children that we're teaching at that time. We know what they should be able to produce. We know how their reading should sound. So we could compare those things to their skills in the first language. So using their first language, having them brainstorm ideas for writing is really helpful because they're thinking in their first language. It's easier for them. And then they can take that and then we can help them with the words to bring that into English, or sentence starters, or just helping them with some vocabulary. It depends on the level of the student. But leveraging their learning with that first language is so important.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Yeah,
and we see it all the time.
Right?
Yeah.
And they're very proud of their skills because often they can feel like, I can't do anything. I'm here and I don't know any of the words and I don't know how things work and I don't understand. But then they go to their first language and they're like, oh yes, I can do all this. I have the skills here, right? So it can boost their confidence as well. Mm-hmm. This is another one that comes up too. Sometimes teachers are like, well, they're not speaking English at home. So how is their English improving? So should they be speaking English at home?
No.
I
never spoke English. At my mother's home, we don't speak English. So
right.
Yeah. I'm still fluent in English, so it works.
Case in point.
Yeah.
Also, again, developing that first language, right? And often, if kids, like parents will come in and say, we're concerned about learning to read, or we're concerned about working on writing. And I'll say, work on first language at home. The skills transfer from one to the other. We use the same skills when we read in Arabic as we do in English, although the books flip the other way. But the skills are the same. We're sounding out words. We're using words for meaning, all of those things.
And all the important things that comes from the parent reading to the child. If they can read in their home language, because they're not going to feel comfortable reading in English yet. Maybe one day, but now it's not the time. So let them read in their home language and have that bond as well with the kids and get them interested in the academic piece.
Did your mom read to you in Italian?
Sometimes, but yeah, she's not as, yeah.
No, yeah.
It was funny. English is my second language, but I was Canadian born. So it was always kind of a, slippery slope.
And that's something interesting.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that, about the Canadian born English language learners?
I honestly didn't know that's what I was until really I took on this role. It's all my life I translated for my mom, and doctor's appointments, even up to this point, I go in with her and I'm her translator, and I just assumed everybody was like that growing up. Our food was different, our family dynamic was different, and I don't know, it made me who I am. So I see where these kids are coming from, and that's why I have such a soft spot for them, because it's difficult when you're kind of get put in the adult role, especially in a doctor's office, or even at the grocery store, when they're asking for money or change, and the parents know what's happening, but you're put on the spot a lot.
And that's true for a lot of our families, that the children are acting as translators for their parents, which adds an extra layer of difficulty and stress for them. Not only at school, but then they're managing all of those home things. They are making appointments. They are calling to handle things. Sometimes they're reading like bank documents. There are all these extra things that we don't think about. So that first language skill is really important. And then the English that they bring home helps their families if they need it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you go back to the home country, it's pretty good that you're still fluent in the language.
Yes. Right. You want to be able to go back and visit family and be able to communicate.
Yeah.
Because I do have friends who have lost their first language, and then they go back and then they're relying on their parents to translate when they go.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Translation. I
fall into using this a bit. And I see, as you can see on the screen, the yes and the no. Sometimes we rely too much on the one student to be the translator for the other students, and it puts a strain on them as well. And so just be mindful of who you're pulling in, at what times you're pulling them, because it's a big job for them to be the translator all the time. And sometimes they're not translating what we want them to translate. So keep an eye on that too.
I remember a story. We had a Mandarin speaker in the South, and another Mandarin speaker moved in. So the first student was helping translate, but the new student wanted her to translate everything. And so he was asking her every single time to translate every single thing that the teacher was saying. And at one point she put on her whiteboard, "on strike," because she was done translating for him. He was just asking too much. So keeping it to those key ideas. Sometimes when I'm working with small groups, I'll talk to kids about like we're talking about something that they may not have run into before, or something that they've never seen before. So then I'll talk to one of them, may be stronger than the other. They may be able to explain to the others, oh, this is what a porcupine is. Because in some parts of the world, you would not have ever run into a porcupine, right? So they are able to translate those keywords that can help with the understanding of the situation or of the content that you're talking about. So taking advantage of those things, but then just not expecting them to translate verbatim all of the instructions, because then they're also not going to learn, right? Like they have to be doing some of the work to try and figure out some of those new words as well.
Does this affect attendance on this?
Yeah, Rod had a good point. This the attendance issues when they're managing for their family. Absolutely, we see it in secondary that they're missing school to take parents to appointments. They're missing school to go to appointments with younger siblings. We don't see it quite as much in the early elementary, but sometimes also in the Grade 7 and 8, right? Those kids that are just a little bit older that are missing school to go and manage some of those family issues. So yeah, that absolutely does happen. So the concern that teachers have, and we want to make sure that we are supporting all the kids in our classroom, but often they wonder, should they be doing the same thing as everybody else? How does that look in the classroom?
Right. It's challenging because we understand the classroom dynamic, and especially when you get to the older grades, but when these children are coming in without the language, it's quite complicated for them to be on point. So yes, modifying the program, and we'll get to that when they're in the step 1 to 3, you're able to modify the program, and they need the vocabulary or they're really going to be lost. So you can mimic what is being taught, but it's not going to look the exact same as their neighbor.
Right. They don't have to be doing the same thing as everybody else.
No.
Yeah. And also it's exhausting being in a classroom all day when you're not understanding. So taking that into account as well and giving them things that are less challenging in terms of language is very helpful, just to give them a bit of a break, because it's quite overwhelming and they're really tired by the end of the day.
Yeah, and it takes 5 to 7 years for them to catch up academically, which is, it only takes 1 to 2 years for the language to come, the actual speech. So it's confusing because you're, like I said earlier, that was my surprise, is you see them, they're speaking fine, but they're they're not there. And also their classmates are going up every year, so they're catching up. It's kind of like they're kind of always at the end trying to catch up.
Right. And that's really important.
Yeah.
Because like 5 to 7 years is a long time.
Right.
So that's a big window where we're able to modify what it is that they're actually doing to support their language learning. And the interesting thing is that you're doing a lot of supporting at the beginning, but as their language skills increase, you're reducing those supports, right? So it's not a forever thing. It's just to support them while they're acquiring language. But you're right, it's the 1 to 2 years for basic conversation, talking about daily things, but then also it's like another 3 to 5 years for that depth of academic language that you were talking about.
Because we don't speak academically usually.
Right, those are the low frequency words that we use in like history and geography and a lot of the math vocabulary and all of those things that we don't use in daily life. We're not talking about vectors or, right?
This is a very broad question. Each kid is very specific. What did they come with?
Yeah.
How close is their first language to ours? Were they taught English? All of those variables.
Yeah. So if you didn't hear Tawny, she brought up a really important point, that it's really individual for the student. And that's the other reason that we are able to modify and dependent on the child's needs, their previous language experience, their current language that they speak at home. All of those things will impact the learning as well as the student's personality too. Right. So yeah, there's lots to think about, and it's really a case-by-case basis depending on the student. Oh, Alicia, I love that. Yes. And so giving them all of that verbal language and lots of opportunity to listen to the language happen and share with others, and sometimes even giving them some of the information ahead of time, right? So giving them the vocabulary for what we're going to be talking about, or sharing with them maybe the manipulatives that you might be using that they may never have seen. But yes, you're right. The only other thing about math is that, so our Arabic speaking students don't use the same numerals as us. So we also have another set of numerals for them to learn. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about modification. We're not going to go heavy into this. This is the ministry documentation. It's how we support English language learners in the classroom. But it gives us a really good idea of how we know when to modify and when they should be able to work at around grade level with some supports, and then at grade level with even less supports. So this is STEP. It's available from EduGains, and it's dependent on the grades. So there's 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 7, 8, 9 to 12 for ESL.
Reading, writing, and oral.
Reading, writing, and oral. So it covers it covers the whole curriculum. So if you're thinking about, oh well, this is only for language, we use reading, writing, and oral in math, in social studies, in science, in geography. So we're looking at it as a lens to look at what it is that we're teaching. Yeah. It's
overwhelming. So.
And we can absolutely answer all kinds of questions about STEP. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about it this
morning.
morning.
Also working on getting the information out to you.
Yes, we're working on a new tool that might be a little bit more helpful.
Yeah. How do I mark them on their work?
Yeah, so this one's also really hard, especially when we're talking about modifications.
Right, so you want to have the end in mind. What are we looking to achieve here? So what's the goal, and how are we going to get them there and mark them based on that? And there's many questions that come up here. How do you know what the modifications are? Where do I put down the modifications? Like, if you're modifying again, how does that look on the report card? So these are all questions that we will answer. Do we have a slide about the report card?
We do actually,
okay.
yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think with the end in mind, and we mark according to that way.
Right.
How I would have done it.
And the marks are based on what they're doing in class, right? Or if you're accommodating or you're modifying, that's what you're marking based on.
Yeah, not necessarily grade curriculum.
Not the, yes, exactly. Not what everybody else is doing, but what the individual child is doing based on what it is that they need right now. So we have some examples about modifications and accommodations. The big thing that we run into with this is that many of us think about modifications in terms of IEPs and modified IEPs. Our modifications look a little bit different because what we're doing is, instead of reducing the difficulty, we're reducing the language. Right? So you're taking a lot of the language out of the activities that they're doing so that they're able to participate. Right? So maybe they're looking at labeling, or maybe they're looking at closed passages, or those kinds of things.
Exactly.
Instead of, for accommodations, we can scaffold activities for them, or we can help them with graphic organizers, right? All of those things can help them work on the same task as everybody else, just with a little bit more support. Whereas if we're actually changing things, we're looking at reducing language.
Yeah, and it's the big confusion is the modifications because of the IEP. These children do not have an IEP. That's a whole different story. Some may eventually, if they fall into the spec ed, but as of now, they do not need an IEP. They're able to be modified if they're between steps 1 and 3. And like we said, it takes 5 to 7 years to get caught up. So
it's okay to modify for a while.
Okay, yeah.
And so I have some quick ways that you can modify here. Some ideas, and then it really depends on what it is your goal is, like you were talking about, right? Like what is the purpose of the task that you're working on, and then what do you really want them to know?
And vocabulary.
There's a lot of words, and my kids will tell me, they'll be like, oh, there's so many words, and
there's so many words that mean so many different things. It gets confusing.
Yeah, sometimes it's helpful to have like a personal dictionary where they can use their first language and the new vocabulary and have a list somewhere. So when they're talking in history or geography or social studies, they can flip back to that list and go, what did that word? Oh, right. Okay, that's what it means.
And grade 3 and 6 teachers, they're allowed to take that with them if it's a personal dictionary in EQAO.
Yeah, so if they create their own personal dictionary, they have one with sheets for math and science and social studies. They can actually use that for grades 3 and 6 EQAO. Yeah. They're not able to use any translators at this time. So this is what we were talking about when we were talking about modifications. So if we were looking at the STEP document, steps 1 to 3 highlighted in red, those students are allowed to have modifications. So you can change what it is those children are actually doing in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes you'll be like, well, where is this step, or what step are they on? It should be in the OSR. And if not, I know we're switching over from Trillium, but in Trillium, it does say what step they are.
Yes, and they've all been updated in the last year, so their step will be current as of last year. And then if you have a new student come in, either Teresa or I will be doing an initial assessment. So we'll come out and meet the student, and then we can help you place them on steps so that you know where they are and what it is that they currently can do, and then what the next step is. So if you look at this, if you have a student that's currently at step 1, these are the things that they can do now. So these are the next steps in terms of language acquisition, not just in terms of reading, but language acquisition across all the subjects.
The same goes to your slide. What should my student be able to do? To refer to this.
Yeah, so if you know that your student is a step 1 here, but maybe they've already got this locating information in the text, that's great. So then they're working on this one next. Whereas this one, they're only here. They're working on high frequency words and pre-taught vocabulary. So it's really your next step, and it's what to teach next and what your next skill is. So it's really useful. It looks a little overwhelming, but once you get into it, it is quite helpful.
And then you can build your report card comments off of this as well.
Exactly, yes. You can use this as part of your report card comments, talking about your specific subjects and what the kids are doing in the classroom. So again, when we talk modifications, immediately we think they need an IEP.
They don't.
They don't.
We're both come back. I'm just finishing. I was just a resource teacher for the last 4 years, so this question came up quite a bit. And I guess when you're looking for accountability, you think an IEP, but however, that steps document is your document that you use, and hopefully it gets passed on from teacher to teacher. But no problem if it doesn't. We're here to help, and we'll help get you through that.
And it is super easy to use.
Yeah.
If you're looking at your observations of your students, you know your kids. You're going to know what it is that they're doing on a regular basis. And again, those steps are the things that they're doing consistently. So until they're doing it consistently, they don't actually get that step. Right?
And it takes about a year a step, so they
on average
take some time.
Yeah, so give yourself some time too. It's okay for them to be taking longer than you think.
Yeah.
We will say that just like everybody else, there is a percentage of students that will require additional supports in terms of possibly an IEP later on, but we don't need an IEP in order to modify. We just wanted to make that really clear.
Yeah.
What do we do about recording?
Everybody's different, right? I personally just put it on my recording sheet. I have their modifications in my mark book, and that's how I would go forward with it, but everybody's different.
So I used to keep mine in Post-its in the step folder. So as I noted things and observations, I would just stick it on their step, whether it was oral, reading, or writing, because then I had it all in their folder that we kept. We're looking at a little bit easier system to deal with to help you keep it, but I like Post-its because then I can read what it is that I saw, what we did, what the specific task was. And it's all there with all the students' records. So if somebody comes in and says, I need to talk to you about so-and-so, I can pull that information and say, well, here on this date we did this, he did this, she did that.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Looking into more of a technology-based recording system.
That would be super helpful.
That's what we're trying
and
to
there's all kinds of stuff we're trying to work on. But yeah, you'll have to find a way to track them, but do keep them somewhere so that you know where you're going and what you've already done. I did include this just because it's a super helpful visual, and this link we'll share with you as a document afterwards. It's a big, huge, long, like 50-page document, but this matrix can sometimes help you wrap your head around what some of those modifications and accommodations look like. So this was just to give you something else to think about, something to look at, but it does have lots of ideas for teachers if you're stuck on what to do. So obviously our students, when they're coming in, they're placed in age-appropriate grade. So it doesn't matter what their school experience was before, right? So what about French class?
Well, and that's a lot of our kids that come from Syria too. They go to Lebanon first, and they do pick up French, and then they come to Canada and they want to be in French classes. So we see this is where we see these kids. Currently, we don't necessarily support, we haven't been supporting the kids up to grade 3 because they're immersed in French at this point.
For French immersion. French immersion in our board is 100% French up until the end of grade 2. So we will support English language acquisition starting in grade 3 because they haven't had any formal instruction in English before then. But just generally, like just in FSL class, there's actually a document that helps teachers support kids in French class. It talks about a lot of the things we've already talked about how the stronger the first language, the easier it is to acquire a second language. And also, our FSL and French immersion teachers are experts at teaching a second language. So they're already doing all of these things, right? They have a lot of these strategies already in their pocket. Oh, I know how to do this. I know to pre-teach vocabulary. I'm going to do all this. So they're often a good resource in a school if you need ideas on how to help students acquire language. But our FSL and FI teachers can also use STEP to help them figure out how it is that they're acquiring language and how they could modify for those students. Oral focus is obviously the place to start in French because, again, they don't have any of the words. So we need to start at the beginning, and oral language is acquired first.
And you've added in document.
Yes. So the French document is actually going to be shared as part of the Dropbox. So you'll be able to access that. It's not a very long document. It's super easy read. So if you have any questions, Alicia, absolutely sharing culture and comparing environments can be super helpful. Kids, if they see themselves in the classroom, are generally happier and more comfortable and more confident. We do have students who absolutely like to teach the whole class about their language. We have kids that do word of the day, where they teach a word every single day to the class in their first language. And then also talking about how things are compared. A lot of our 7-8 students that we've had come from Syria, and then a couple of other countries near there, have enjoyed comparing how their lifestyle there and their lifestyle in Canada, when they're looking at it in terms of like history and geography, because they have a lot of the knowledge about where they came from, and they can use that to help them learn about what it's like here.
And even the content in the books, right? It's so different.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody in Africa reading a book, and I remember reading one of these podcasts or watching a podcast, and she was talking about how she would love to write books, and she'd write about, they always talked about the weather, so she would write about the weather, but it didn't relate to her because it was always hot. So it's have dual language books too. It's really important.
Yes.
And have there's lots of great books in Arabic about their culture and their journey here.
Mm-hmm.
Those are good. The Stepping Stone is one of my favorite.
Often having a box of books in their first language. We have a fairly large children's library in Chatham that you can access that has a number of books in their first language. So you could have a bin of books where they can actually read in their first language. We've had parents come in and read stories or share songs, or I had one parent write a book in both languages, her and her daughter. And so they wrote this story together, and then mom came in and she read the portion in their first language, and then the daughter read the portion in English. And it was super exciting for the kids to hear that new language. We also had some kindergarten teachers this year who brought in parents or mystery readers, right? And then so some of the parents came in and the kids were just fascinated.
If they can't find the dual language, we have links to online digital.
Yes. Okay. So there are some online libraries that we can access, and we have links to those as well. I'll make sure to add these at the end of the slide presentation before we share it. So there's the International Children's Library. There's Unite for Literacy. Children can access books in their first language and listen in their first language. So you could also share those with the class, and then they can talk about what it is that they've heard and what they noticed and how things were different for your for our Canadian-born English-speaking children as well.
Right.
We check the box on the report card?
Only if you modify.
We get this question a lot, and it's understandable because it's not always super clear.
Right.
Yeah. So if you're modifying for the student, then you're checking the box on the report card.
Yeah.
If you're not modifying, the box isn't checked. And you don't have to check the box on all of them.
No.
Right?
No,
you could check the box maybe in language, but maybe
not
you're not
gem.
modifying math, or maybe you're not modifying phys ed or visual arts. It really depends on the student and what you're doing with that particular student in the classroom.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I am attached in the notes to the administrators all about the report cards.
Yeah.
And success.
Teresa made this amazing one-page handout for administrators on our policies and how to handle when you're reading report cards, and really quick list of things that you need to think about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
EQAO. students, some schools choose not to. It's the same though. They don't write, they get the 0. So a lot of administrators choose to have them write. They have the same right, if they're between steps 1 and 3, they're able to have the same rights as the IEP kids. So they can have technology, they can have a scriber, they can have whatever they need at that point. And go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we put them into the SDC the same way that we put in our kids that are on IEPs. They go in as English language learners, and then they are able to access all the accommodations, whatever they need. Maybe they don't need a scribe, but they do need the technology to support, or maybe they need all of those things. Again, they have to be step 1 to 3, and it has to be things that you're regularly doing in the classroom, just like your kids on IEPs.
Right.
But
which is it can be sticky, right?
Yeah, and we do have some students that are exempted. That's a case-by-case basis, and it does impact the school score, so that's definitely an administrator question. Thanks, Pam. Yes. Okay, so we can do observation. We do a lot of observation, especially when they're in early stages of language acquisition. So you can take notes, you can video, you can take pictures. All of those things are valid forms of assessment for our students. And quick things like just your thumbs up, I understand. All of those little tiny things can tell you a lot. But yes, observation is totally a valid way to gather information. So we're at the end. If you have any more questions, please feel free to engage on Twitter after this. We will happily answer any of your questions. You can also always email us with anything that you need. And we're happy to answer questions and dig deeper into anything that you have more questions about.
Yeah, by all means, the conversation needs to go on for sure. I'm drawn to this understanding that I had in, I think it was about 1994, this going back a little bit, but we had this young girl come to my grade 8 class from Iraq. And her story was really, really tragic, the things that happened to her family. But is there anything about that sort of understanding the context of a story of a child or a family that can, I think I know it can help sort of a class put their arms around someone who's different, whose name is different, who speaks with a different accent, who is largely isolated, not only from language, but just because they're different. And in a lot of cultural experiences, you come in and you're different, you're sort of isolated. So one of the things I remember doing was having her bring up a book that she had brought from Iraq. And back in the day, we had this thing called an overhead projector. I don't know if you still have these things. But by photocopying that and putting it on overhead transparency and putting it on the screen for them to see this Cyrillic writing that had to be read from right to left, the students seeing that just were slack-jawed to try and figure out, how is this person ever going to understand English if we don't help her out? And to me, I don't know if there's any comment you want to make on that, but that experience of the immigrant is one that I think can enrich a classroom if it's shared the right way.
Absolutely. Empathy, right? We need to help kids understand where they're coming from. And that's why I like that book, The Stepping Stone. When I read it to my students, it's about their journey here. It was from Syria. And one of the parts is when they come over and the people that don't make it, they plant flowers here. And this little girl, she's grade 1, 6 years old, she says to me, we did that. And it made me teary because she was talking about her family that didn't make it. And and having, when the children, it was read to the class, it gave them more insight on what was happening and their journey here, and that it's not easy. It's not just getting on an airplane and going on vacation.
It's not, and the stories are incredible. Yeah. Like, and often when they're first here, the story is only partial. But after a couple of years, I've sat down and talked to kids, and they're telling me more about the story, and more details come out. And these kids have incredible resilience and have been through things that we can't even begin to comprehend. Identity texts can sometimes be helpful in sharing their story. Sometimes like encouraging them to write about their own experience, or even share a story from their culture. I've done that in book creator on the iPads, which is really fun, right? Because then they can share something about themselves, but having that connection to both their life before and their life here is really important. And it's also important to understand where it is they're coming from.
Once they feel comfortable, they're willing to share.
That's true.
First, they're a little bit
Yes.
nervous about it. So
Yeah.
getting to know,
Creating that safe space is really
Right.
important, so that they know that they can actually share those things and take risks, and language acquisition happens that way too.
Well, your presentation has helped open our eyes to a lot of the issues that these immigrant families are facing, and the ELL learner that's in the classroom is much more than just a problem to be solved. There's a lot more to it. So thanks so much for sharing it was a broad-based discussion that you went across so many issues related to the learning that's supposed to happen, and how we document that, and how we track that.
There is a lot, and we just wanted to help with some of the background things.
Yeah, and it's just
Really
just an
good at
introduction.
getting to know the kids. Yeah.
And where there's so much more. So those resources, as you share with me, we'll put them in the Dropbox so people can follow up. But I'm going to take a moment to thank you and Tawny in the background that was supporting the two of you, and all of the people that attended this morning to help learn more about ELL learners. Really a wonderful presentation, a great way to start the day. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much for everybody coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.